good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Timothy Marbun, and I would like to, on behalf of the team, welcome you to the launch of World Bank Indonesia flagship report, Indonesia Economic Prospects, Boosting the Recovery. It is my honor to host today's event and also the discussion, especially the launch of the report today. And our event today will continue until 10:30 this morning, Jakarta time. In this event, we will hear remarks from World Bank Country Director for Indonesia and Timor-Leste, Ibu Satu Kahkonen, and also we will hear remarks from Deputy Head of Mission of the Australian Embassy, Bapak Alistair Cox. And our keynote speaker for today is Bapak Suhasil Nazara, Vice Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia. And to present the report that is being launched today is the lead economist of World Bank Indonesia and Timor-Leste, Bapak Habib Rab. Now, our second session today, we will be diving deeper into how entities can help boost the recovery in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic by talking to our panelists. Joining me later on is Bapak Febrio Kacaribu, Head of Fiscal Policy Agency from the Ministry of Finance. Also joining me later is Ibu Ira Noviarti, the President Director of PT Unilever Indonesia. Also joining me is Ibu Ana Patricia Sutanto. She is the Vice CEO of PT Pan Brothers. And also there is Ibu Noni Purnomo, President Director of PT Bluebird Tbk. Now, I'd also like to remind all participants that you have the option to follow the whole program in Bahasa or English by clicking the button on the bottom of your screen. Now, for the media, there will be a press conference immediately right after this event, and you need to be registered as media to join. Please choose the press conference option on your screen to join this press conference, and also please do mention your name and also your media outlet when you submit your questions. Now, we invite you to follow World Bank Indonesia Twitter account at Bank Dunia. And also, we would like to invite you to use the hashtag IEP Bank Dunia for the conversation in social media. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the event today will start with remarks from World Bank Country Director for Indonesia and Timor-Leste, Ibu Satu Kahkonen. Good morning, Ibu Satu. The screen is yours.
Terima kasih dan selamat datang. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the launch of the June 2021 edition of the Indonesia Economic Prospects. As we start this event, I would like to acknowledge our distinguished speakers and guests. Pak Suhasil Nazara, Deputy Minister of Finance, Pak Febrio Kacaribu, Head of the Fiscal Policy Agency of the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Alistair Cox, Deputy Ambassador, Australian Embassy in Jakarta, Ibu Anne Sutanto, Vice CEO of Pan Brothers, Ibu Ira Noviarti, President Director of Unilever Indonesia, and Ibu Noni Purnomo, President Director of Bluebird. I would also like to thank Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade for their continued support for World Bank's analytical work in Indonesia. And I also hope that all participants connected today are keeping well under the unprecedented circumstances that we are facing. Due to the pandemic, the world experienced in the last year one of the most severe recessions in living memory. The world economy shrank by 3.5% compared to 2.1% in Indonesia. The world economy, although the recession in Indonesia has been milder, millions of people have lost their jobs and experienced a drop in earnings. And about 3 million people have fallen into poverty. It could have been worse, but government's bold policy response avoided potentially worse economic and social outcomes. Looking ahead, The priority for the world is to end this costly recession as soon as possible and to build a stronger, more sustainable, and inclusive post-pandemic economy. Achieving that will involve addressing 4 policy priorities. The first priority is to win the race against infection. This is critical to alleviating human suffering and in parallel to improve consumer and investor sentiment. This will require accelerating the vaccination campaign and ensuring sufficient testing, tracing, and isolation, as well as appropriate mobility restrictions. Meanwhile, it is vital to monitor the spread of new variants and rapidly suppress their transmission. The second priority is to maintain an accommodative monetary policy stance and stimulate private credit growth to support the real sector. This will need to be done while managing external financing pressures and banking sector vulnerabilities. Borrower support programs, such as debt repayment relief, credit guarantees, interest rate subsidies, could also contribute to improving private credit growth. The third priority is to maintain fiscal support in the short term, while ensuring medium-term fiscal sustainability. Providing resources for vaccination and other public health measures is essential to control the pandemic and build confidence. It is also important to continue to support the poor and vulnerable households and viable firms until the green shoots of the recovery have taken hold. In parallel, a credible medium-term fiscal strategy could improve fiscal space and investor confidence. The importance of raising more tax revenues as part of this plan could not be overstated. The fourth and final priority is to improve the creation of productive jobs for both men and women. The pandemic has added to Indonesia's employment challenges, but crisis can also be an opportunity to reform and build forward better. A reform plan for job creation could be built around 4 pillars. The first pillar could be mitigation of job losses during the crisis. This would require maintaining adequate job retention training and reskilling programs until the recovery is strong. The second priority could focus on creation of more middle-class jobs. Although Indonesia has created a lot of jobs that are important for poverty reduction, it is lacking middle-class jobs that are more productive, earn higher incomes, and provide social benefits. The global evidence suggests that competition, investment, and trade are powerful engines for middle-class job creation. Indonesia has recently taken important steps to attract more investment through the Omnibus Law on job creation. The focus is now on its effective implementation and complementary reforms to address the remaining challenges, in particular, the barriers to trade that Indonesia still has. The third pillar could focus on equipping the workforce with skills, and that would be done through improving learning and education. And the fourth and final pillar could focus on bringing more women to the labor force and reducing earning gaps between men and women. Greater economic participation of women can have substantial growth dividends. However, getting more women to work will require addressing the child and elderly care. And as a woman, I also believe that more women in leadership roles can be an important driver for change. I'm delighted to see 3 women business leaders among our distinguished panelists today. We are very pleased to have such a distinguished and high-powered set of panelists from the Ministry of Finance and leading private sector businesses in Indonesia. We are grateful for your time, Pa Sua, Pa Febrio, Ibu Anne, Ibu Ira, and Ibu Noni. We look forward to hearing your insights and recommendations for Indonesia to boost the recovery and create jobs. I hope that you will enjoy the rest of the event. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Ibu Satu, for your remarks today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to remind you that you have the option to follow our program in English or in Bahasa by clicking that option on the bottom of your screen. Now, esteemed guests, next is remarks from the Deputy Head of Mission of the Australian Embassy in Indonesia, Bapak Alistair Cox. Mr. Cox, the screen is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Timothy. Yang terhormat Wakil Menteri Keuangan Republik Indonesia. Pleased to attend this launch event for the Indonesia Economic Prospects Report, Boosting the Recovery. And as you will all appreciate, the nature of the challenges facing economies all around the world increases the importance of reports like this being produced and discussed right now. Having access to robust evidence and analysis is critical for an understanding of how to shape future government policies and reforms. And Ibu Satu has suggested some of the options there. This is particularly acute now as all countries try to overcome the impacts of COVID-19 and avoid the scarring which it has caused and boost economic recovery efforts. I don't want to preempt what Pak Habib will present, so I'll hold off from previewing any of his remarks. But I do want to reflect that what we have seen in other countries shows that COVID-19 can quickly return. And I think right now in Indonesia, we are seeing that, unfortunately, with the growth, including of this new Delta variant. Even as vaccines are rolled out, it's difficult to predict the economic future, especially during this once in a 100-year pandemic. This is not experience that we've necessarily had in recent modern times before. Governments and donors, therefore, have a key role in seeking to reduce, mitigate as much as possible of this uncertainty and to try to help retain confidence across the community and ultimately the economy. And this means getting the health response right is as important for itself as for the economy. The World Bank's analysis helps chart a credible trajectory for the economy and the budget through reforms that will help to enhance the country's medium-term prospects, further support workers, accelerate productivity across the country, and further unlock women's economic potential. While reform may not be easy or straightforward, it will support Indonesia to realise its economic aspirations. Ensuring as many people as possible can contribute to and benefit from the recovery will be a key to Indonesia's development in coming years. And as a long-term supporter of the World Bank's work in Indonesia and a champion of gender equality, the Australian Embassy is delighted to see the World Bank focus on female labour force participation in this update. This topic is critical to boosting the recovery now and to help Indonesia achieve its long-term economic potential. We know Indonesians' women's participation in the workforce was already considerably lower than men due to a lack of access, for example, to childcare arrangements. On top of this, we know that the ongoing impact of this pandemic is affecting women more than men. Evidence from Badan Pusat Statistik last year indicated that women were leaving the labour force at a greater rate than men, and the burden of care for children, the sick and elderly falls disproportionately onto women. For example, with schools still closed across much of Indonesia, it is generally women who are supporting their children to learn from home. That is why women's economic empowerment, including through increased participation in the formal sector, particularly as we move past the pandemic or into the latter stages, is a core priority for us in our work and collaboration with Indonesia. In closing, thanks to the World Bank for producing yet another relevant update on the Indonesian economy. I hope this can inform discussions on how the government and partners like Australia and the World Bank can boost Indonesia's recovery. Australia is very proud of its long-standing collaboration with close partners like the World Bank in supporting the government of Indonesia. We will work together to support Indonesia's recovery and strengthen the foundations for an inclusive and resilient economy for coming months and years ahead. I also want to take this opportunity, this is one of my last public events with the World Bank, as I will soon complete my posting in Jakarta, to express my deep appreciation for the collaboration and support across the Indonesian government and the World Bank over the past 3.5 years that I've been here, and specifically since the start of the pandemic through to today. Thank you to you all, and I look forward to hearing Pak Habib's presentation and to the panel discussion on the critical area of women's economic participation in Indonesia's economic recovery. Terima kasih. Thank you very much. Good morning.
Also, we'd like to wish you your best on your next mission, and I'll have to say that we will miss you, but we're looking forward to work with you again in another event, probably in another chance. Thank you very much, Mr. Cox, and good luck. Thank you. Next, let us listen to the keynote speech for the event, which will be delivered by the Vice Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia, Bapak Suhasil Nazara. Bapak Suhasil, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Pak Timothy Marbun. Very good morning to all of you. Ms. Satu Kakonen, Country Director of Indonesia and Timor-Leste of the World Bank. Pak Alastair Cox, I follow your speech, Pak, and I have to tell you that I'm quite surprised with your last point that you are ending your mission in Indonesia. I believe that a long time relationship between Indonesia and Australia, and also with the Australian Embassy in Indonesia, has been maintained during your service here. Certainly, I will personally miss you, and I really hope the best for your next assignment, and hoping that we will be able to meet again in the future. Pak Alastair, all the best to you. I also would like to say good morning to Pak Habib and also all the distinguished speakers. I think first I would like to thank the World Bank for inviting me for this Indonesian Economic Prospect Report launch. The theme of the report is very timely, boosting the recovery. It is the spirit that the government would like to we really would like to boost the recovery, and it's very close to our heart. This theme is very close to our heart. And I also would like to appreciate the bank for always providing timely and important economic analysis that can become the reference for many in Indonesia and also in the international environment, as well as a policy input to the government. I think we have been in this pandemic for about a year or so, and then I'm very grateful to read the report, this report, and that covers very much the areas that are very important for our handling the pandemic as well as the boosting the recovery. Let me, in the next couple of minutes, let me give you some of the thinking, some of the thoughts that happening in the Indonesian policy maker. And later, I understand that one of the speaker in the panel would be Pa Febrio, who can elaborate more in detail a lot of what I cover in this keynote speech. Number one, of course, we understand that this COVID-19 is spreading very fast. It spreads all over the world, but there is one feature that is very important to note. That is, whenever we have a decline in the cases, it doesn't mean that the COVID is going away. It can go up again. It can go back up. And a lot of other economies we have already seen that particular feature in a lot of other economy, which really makes us very important to be constantly cautious about the spread of this COVID-19. And for Indonesia, the increase of the COVID-19 in the last couple of weeks is notable. And we have already been very cautious, and the government is taking all the necessary measures to make sure that we can reduce the number of infection. Nevertheless, if we look at the mobility, we look at the people's mobility during starting in February or March this year, maybe starting in March. Starting in March, people's mobility is starting going up. March, April, May, and June is also, there is a positive increase in the people's mobility. So we really hope that the quarter two is a period for boosting this recovery. But of course, we have to be cautious all the time. And in this environment, from the economic point of view, we understand that it is important that the fiscal policy continue to be flexible. Fiscal policy has to be flexible because consumption can go up but can decline very fast. Investment is also like that. Export and import is also in that shape. So the fiscal policy is should be very flexible. Last year we expand our fiscal deficits to 6.1%. This year, we aim to a level of 5.7% of the GDP for the fiscal deficits. The government is connecting with the monetary policy in a fashion that has never been existed in modern Indonesia. That is the central bank buying directly government debts from the primary markets. They are conducting as a standby buyer. It is not an anomaly in Indonesia, in international environment. It is also happening in other countries, and I believe that the researchers at the World Bank can also provide the international comparisons of different fiscal and monetary connections during the pandemic. In addition to that, the micro and micro prudential measures are being put in place. The OJK came very quickly last year, putting relaxation on the banking so that the banking sector can continue to can continue to operate in the way that is healthy. But of course, everything should be temporary. A lot of fiscal policy, fiscal incentives are temporary, macro-prudential policy are temporary. Even a lot of temporary measures are put in place, and it is very important to understand the way how to for the transition toward the permanent or the normal period. But we don't know when the normal is going to be. What we understand is whether the demand is increasing, but whenever the demand is increasing, there is no guarantee that the health will continue to be in place. So in that perspective, I can assure you that the very important feature that we manage at the policy discussion is how the fiscal can be very, very flexible. Now, flexibility of the fiscal policy does not mean that we should go with the higher deficits all the time or changing the deficits from one day to another. During the pandemic, what happens in the policy discussion is that there is no short of brilliant ideas what programs to launch. It is always like that. So a lot of programs can emerge, can pop up, and we have to do the discussion about the different policy recommendations, and it may have fiscal impact. But the way how we should do the fiscal response does not mean that we keep on adding the expenditures. It is very important to have a very important to have a good sense of priorities. What are the priorities? So I understand that the discussion in the discussion right now look at the budget as if it is something that is the budget already been approved and it must be implemented. The implementation of budget is very flexible. We can increase the social assistance, for example, and we are now increasing the social assistance. Right now there are a number of social assistance that we increase, but it doesn't mean increasing the whole government expenditures. We do reprioritization of our expenditures, and this is very important because we still don't know what's going to be happening with the COVID, what's going to happen with the economic pressures and so on. So the point that I would like to send is that the fiscal is very ready to continue to be flexible, but we will maintain the integrity of the whole budget. Right now, this year, 5.7% of the GDP, we hope we will be able to maintain, and gradually, because we understand that the economic growth will kick in, gradually the fiscal deficit will continue to go down, and we hope that the declining of the fiscal deficit, because it is happening at the same time with the increase of the consumption and investment, it's going to be still will support the whole economic progress, economic growth. The game changer is vaccine. We understand very well the budget. Our budgets for vaccine, I think it's quite high. This year, 58 trillion Indonesian rupiah. We are ready with the budget. A lot of things about the budget is that the availability. A lot of things about the vaccine is that the availability of vaccines, and of course the international context of the vaccines availability is very important. We believe that vaccines should be available for everyone. the whole world can only heal. We can only handle this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, if a vaccine is available for everyone. So it is very important to provide vaccine, and Indonesia is also on its way to produce our own vaccine, the domestic vaccine, and we will be making sure that whenever we have to buy, we will do our best to buy the vaccine, and producing the vaccine and also other health equipments are becoming very important for Indonesia. On the availability of vaccine, I would like to appreciate the support of the World Bank on supporting the availability of vaccines to Indonesia. It is very important that vaccine will also be available for the whole world. So it is very important. The vaccine is like a game changer. The second game changer is the budget that continues to support the economy. And for the social protection, I think the colleagues from World Bank looks already at our different perspective of the social assistance. We also provide the support for the micro and small medium enterprises. We provide the credit guarantee. We provide the interest rate subsidy. OJK provides the relaxation to the banking sector. The banking sector continues to have ample liquidity. I think it's quite ample. But of course, the banking sector right now, they put their excess liquidity in government debts. We understand this practice as a short-term practice, and it is very important that we continue to support the banking sector so that they are able to lend their money to the business sector and increase the credit growth. This is something that should happen as natural as possible, but with very strong support of the government. There are different kind of supports, temporary supports, and also the permanent policy supports. Our credit guarantee program has been expanded, not only KUR, not only the Kredit Usaha Rakyat, but also expanded to other medium enterprises. And at the same time, we are handling a number of our state-owned enterprise for them to be able to continue their services to the people. And I agree with the report that says that it is critical to maintain adequate social assistance for the people, especially the poor and the vulnerable, and that is what the budget is doing. And we are quite flexible in terms of the social assistance and also the support to the micro and small enterprises. The other challenge that I also noted from the report is that the notion about maintaining the medium and long-term fiscal sustainability. This is very important. Of course, a lot will have to depend on the economic situation, but the government, the budget understands very well the need of the budget to become the game changer during the pandemic. But it is also very important to make sure that when the consumption already comes up, when the people start the mobility, opening up the economy in a gradual manner, investment may still be coming in. It's time for the budget to heal itself. It is very important that the budget comes to its health, and partly is about the revenue reform. So that I would like to use this opportunity as well to tell you that the revenue reform is very close to our heart. We would like to increase the number, the tax ratio, but we will do it in a very, very cautious way. So in regards with the current discussions that are out there about the government would like to put tax on sembako or the basic necessities, it is not the intention. The intention is to make sure that we have a policy framework that can support our medium-term tax policy. It is not the intention of the government to just making sure that we have more revenue. What is more important is to make sure that there are equality in the taxation principles. The equality in the taxation principles is very important because in Indonesia, we are getting into a situation where certain goods basically can be very cheap, but certain goods can also be very, very expensive. I think a number of examples have already been shown in the public sphere. That is how even rice can be very cheap. The low quality rice is much cheaper comparatively to the very high end of rice quality. So we believe taxation principles of equality should be part of the taxation principles. This is what we would like to put. And of course, a single tariff for the value-added tax, we have to discuss its virtue together with the multiple tariffs. So the policy discussion is something that I would like the World Bank to continue to promote, and I really hope that we will be able to design the tax principles that can be very, very useful for the medium term Indonesia. Finally, I would like to also appreciate the notes from the report that elaborates a lot about the employment and also the gender. I really hope that the two can be elaborated further during the discussion with the panelists, and World Bank can also provide us, the Ministry of Finance, with a number of different perspectives on how we can promote the employment. I think it's very important for the recovery and also the gender balance out of this pandemic. I think one last point that I would like to mention is that we all understand that the government has already released the omnibus of job creation law, and it is part of our structural reform that we would like to promote. And it is very important to make sure that the operationalization of this job creation law can be also very important. It is different ministries, different sectors regulation should be made in line with the job creation law. The operationalization is very important. The one-stop service of investment, for example, should be put in place in the very near future. The establishment of our sovereign wealth fund is a way for Indonesia to promote the equity-based development financing, in addition to the debt-based or leverage-based development financing. A lot of things gonna happen. I believe that we hope the recovery will continue in Indonesia, and we'll be able to continue the development for the prosperity of Indonesian people. Once again, thank you very much for the World Bank for releasing the report. I really hope that the discussion later with the panelists can also be fruitful for many of us. Thank you very much, and stay healthy, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bapak Suhasil, for delivering the keynote speech in our event today. Now, allow me to remind everyone once again that you can listen to our program in Bahasa or English. The option is on your screen. Now, before we continue to the much-awaited panel discussion on the economic recovery, jobs, and women participation in the economy, we will first get to dive into the IEP report launched today. Now, if you want to join the conversation in social media, please follow our Twitter account @BankDunia and also use the hashtag #IEPBankDunia for the conversation today on social media. Now, we would like to welcome Bapak Habib Rab, lead economist for World Bank Indonesia and Timur-Leste, to present the IEP report entitled Boosting the Recovery. Now, before Mr. Rab takes the screen, here is a brief video to warm us up for the presentation.
In 2020, Indonesia experienced its first recession in 2 decades due to the COVID-19. Both unemployment and poverty increased. But the government's bold policy response avoided potentially worse outcomes. The Indonesian economy is expected to rebound by 4.4% in 2021. Growth is projected to increase to 5% in 2022, assuming a faster vaccine rollout. To boost the recovery and improve medium-term growth prospects, Indonesia will need to tackle 3 challenges. The first is to win the race against infections by accelerating the vaccine rollout and reducing viral transmission. The second is to maintain adequate monetary and fiscal policy support until the recovery is strong. The third is to ensure medium-term fiscal sustainability and improve fiscal space, including by raising more tax revenue. Although COVID-19 risks are exacerbating Indonesia's employment challenges, it is also an opportunity for reforms with 4 broad objectives. First, mitigate job losses during the crisis. Second, boost productivity and middle-class jobs. Third, equip the workforce with the skills needed for higher productivity jobs. And fourth, bring more women into the labor force and reduce earning gaps between men and women.
Terima kasih Pak Tim. Selamat pagi dan selamat datang di presentasi laporan Indonesia Economic Prospects. Yang terhormat Bapak Swasil Nazara, Wakil Menteri Keuangan. Edition of the Indonesia Economic Prospects on behalf of a large team led by our senior country economist, Abdullah Si. My presentation is divided in 2 parts. The first is our analysis of economic development's prospects and policy priorities, which we will look through 4 different blocks. The first is the impact of the COVID health shock on the economy. Secondly, how policies have helped to mitigate the effects of the shock. Thirdly, our views on the economic outlook, and fourthly, recommended policy priorities. The second part will look more closely at the issue of job creation, both the immediate challenge of getting people back to work and the medium to long-term opportunities of creating middle-class jobs. So COVID has thrown a series of devastating punches that has severely bruised the global economy. What we expected a year ago to be a short and sharp blow to economic activity, followed by a very rapid V-shaped rebound, has proved to be a lot more unpredictable and long-lasting, as His Excellency the Vice Minister noted. In 2020, the global economy shrank by 3.5%. In Indonesia, the economic bruise from the health punch in 2020 was a little less severe than other emerging markets. The Indonesian economy contracted by less than that of peer countries, which is illustrated in the first chart. At the same time, Indonesia took a little longer to get back on its feet in the immediate aftermath of the shock, and until the first quarter of this year, as illustrated in the chart showing Indonesia and peers moving back, the speed at which they were moving back to pre-crisis growth trends. More recent data, however, as noted by His Excellency the Vice Minister, suggests that in the second quarter of 2021, efforts to control the pandemic have accelerated domestic demand and output. Now, the combined health and economic shock with associated mobility restrictions have directly affected firms and households. By the third quarter of last year, more than 40% of firms were reporting drops in sales, as shown in the first chart. Declining sales were sustained in the early part of this year because of rising COVID cases and associated mobility restrictions. Though increased access to government programs has helped firms, financial pressures on those firms have unsurprisingly persisted. Now, these firm-level developments have also impacted the labor market. About 1.8 million people became unemployed between February 2020 and February 2021, and another 3.2 million people exited the labor force. These have contributed to an estimated 2.8 million people falling into poverty, increasing the poverty rate from 9.2% to 10.2%, as illustrated in the second chart. On the response, fiscal policy has really been the workhorse of Indonesia's fight against COVID. The fiscal response compares favorably to other countries in terms of its overall size. And this is illustrated in the first chart when you see the change in the primary deficit between 2019 and 2020. Over this period, as the Vice Minister noted, the authorities nearly tripled overall social assistance spending. Real expenditure grew very rapidly, as can be seen in the second chart, without which the number of people falling into poverty could have been 2 times higher than what it actually was. The fiscal expansion was well balanced by a measured dose of monetary expansion. Monetary policy has the challenging role of managing external financing pressures on the one hand, which call for positive interest rate differentials with other markets, and supporting the domestic economy on the other, which in these times call for interest rate cuts. Now, this trade-off came to a head in the early part of this year when rising US yields led to foreign investment outflows from emerging markets, including Indonesia. And this is what you can see in this first chart. Now, the Indonesian authorities responded to this pressure with a combination of exchange rate flexibility, protecting external buffers, and maintaining the policy rate. And in our view, this was entirely consistent with domestic and external economic conditions, particularly as real interest rates have remained elevated relative to domestic economic conditions when we compare to other countries. And this is likely related to Indonesia's external exposure. And this is illustrated in the second chart, that despite lower inflation relative to Indonesia's official target, the real interest rates have been fairly high. Finally, despite monetary and macroprudential easing, private sector credit has consistently fallen since the start of the pandemic, which is illustrated in the first chart, even though commercial bank credit to the government has in fact risen. Now, bank balance sheets are generally very strong. Liquidity has increased since the start of the pandemic due to the decline in lending and increase in deposits, and non-performing loans are relatively low, whilst provisioning for them remains fairly high. At the same time, loans at risks have increased quite sharply, which may have contained the appetite to lend. But there are also demand-side issues. Banks Indonesia surveys point to a general fall in the demand for bank credit. This could be related to an uptick in financial pressures of corporates, as illustrated in the case of listed companies in the second chart, which could have dissuaded some of them to take on more debt. I now turn to the economic outlook, which, as our speakers have already noted, remains subject to a large margin of uncertainty. In our baseline, we project the economy to grow at 4.4% in 2021 and 5% over the medium term. The pickup in domestic demand is predicated on containment of the pandemic, recovery in confidence, and a gradual strengthening of labor market conditions. On the external front, the US fiscal stimulus package is expected to have positive spillovers on growth and Indonesia's commodity prices. The outlook assumes that global financial conditions remain accommodative, which could support capital inflows, while stronger commodity prices and structural reforms such as the Jobs Omnibus Law could improve in FDI inflows. On the other hand, slower than expected vaccine rollout, renewed acceleration in COVID cases, tighter external finance, and weaker global growth could lead to a potentially worse outcome. and this, in our view, poses at least 3 policy challenges. The first policy challenge is around winning the race against the COVID infections. The recent acceleration in daily cases is a cause for health, social, and economic concerns. The authorities have established a very sound vaccination program, and vaccine supply constraints in the run-up to the Eid holidays have reportedly started to ease, which is good news. There is nevertheless a long road ahead before Indonesia can achieve herd immunity. This calls for prioritizing vaccines in geographic locations where transmission rates are the highest. It also calls for adequate testing, tracing, and isolation, along with non-pharmaceutical interventions, such as targeted mobility restrictions, which would weigh on the economic recovery. The second policy challenge is to maintain accommodative monetary policy whilst managing external financing pressures. Strong external buffers, a negative output gap, low inflation, and the US Federal Reserve's relatively dovish outlook justify low nominal interest rates in Indonesia. Premature monetary tightening could raise government borrowing costs and exacerbate the lack of credit impulse. It could also delay medium-term recovery if external financing pressures force further rate hikes further down the road. Adjustments to the current stance should therefore be informed by close coordination with fiscal policy, as the Vice Minister mentioned, which should enable a recovery in domestic demand. And this should support acceleration of supply, which will require monetary support. The third policy challenge relates to balancing much needed fiscal support in the short term whilst ensuring fiscal sustainability in the medium term. In the short term, as noted earlier, it is important to continue providing relief to households, as seems to be the authorities' priority. In our assessment, maintaining the social assistance package at the same level as last year could reduce the poverty rate from 10.2% in 2020 to 9.5% in 2021. Fiscal policy will also drive the vaccination program, which can help to build confidence and the recovery in demand. Over the medium term, the budget could start cutting back on public transfers where the needs are diminished, or where further efficiency gains can be achieved as key economic indicators begin to improve. In parallel, there needs to be a revenue effort, albeit an equitable one, as the Vice Minister noted. As illustrated in the first chart, revenues always struggle to recover after crises. At the same time, expenditure needs remain very sticky and quite elevated. Therefore, returning to the 3% of GDP fiscal deficit target, as illustrated in the second chart, has to be achieved ideally through a mix of both revenue and expenditure measures, which are discussed in more detail in the report. This brings me to the second and final part of the presentation, which is on job creation. Between 2000 and 2019, Indonesia created an average of 2.4 million jobs each year. The concurrent rise in labor income helped to drastically reduce poverty. Now, the challenge going forward is that unless the economy can employ Indonesian workers in higher quality jobs or enhance women's economic participation, it will be difficult to sustain growth and improve standards of living. Currently, 47% of Indonesian workers are estimated to be stuck in just below middle-class status. In addition, half of adult women are not formally participating in the labor force. So COVID-19, of course, has weighed on addressing this long-term challenge by disrupting economic activity, shrinking employment opportunities, and diverting resources away from human and capital investment. So we propose a four-pronged strategy to address this challenge. The first, of course, is the immediate priority, making sure that people have lost their jobs or not been able to participate in the labor force can be gainfully employed. And we have already discussed the headline numbers, which to some extent mask specific challenges, such as those of urban micro businesses, which have been disproportionately affected, or the challenges of youth, which recent graduates that are not finding jobs being at risk of losing skills and being stuck in jobs that are not commensurate with their potential, or the challenges for women that are forced to take on jobs or to compensate for lost family incomes. Though we see, as you can see in the chart, a positive net employment impact for women over the past year, most are actually forced to engage in low productivity employment. The exception is for young women, potentially due to care responsibilities for smaller children. Addressing these challenges, the authorities are already doing, means to sustain adequate job relief measures to mitigate job losses and scarring. This goes back to our earlier recommendations on maintaining adequate monetary and fiscal support for the real sector over the medium term. The second priority is around boosting productivity growth, which has stagnated not just in Indonesia, but in most parts of the world in the run-up to the COVID crisis. Most job creation over the last 2 decades have been in low productivity services. This is fine and understandable because the economy had to absorb a large share of low-skilled workers from the agriculture sector. This in turn played an important role in reducing poverty. But jobs that are offered that offer a middle-class living standard were those that were created in higher productivity industries. Yet the growth of those industries and firms within those industries has potential to accelerate. The types of productivity boosting structural reforms contained in the Jobs Omnibus Law could help to reverse this trend, removing micro distortions like investment restrictions, anti-competitive rules, or burdensome business regulations prevent the free flow of capital to their most productive use. It will require lifting of restrictions on trade and deepening the financial system, which are all key ingredients to accelerating productivity growth. But this, of course, will not be sufficient. Unleashing productivity growth can increase the demand for more skills, but will also require a greater supply of skills in the domestic market. And the challenges here are well known. Improving learning outcomes by further upgrading the quality of education, strengthening the quality of training and vocational education systems to enable supply of more relevant skills to the market, and labor legislation reform that protect workers on the job. Finally, enhancing women's participation in the economy and the labor force is simply the smartest economic thing to do. This is not just because Indonesian girls outperform boys with higher PISA results in maths, science, and reading, but the potential economic growth gains are very sizable. We estimate that Indonesia could increase female labor force participation to 59% by 2025, and this could see an increase of up to 0.7 percentage points in annual growth rates above the current baseline projections. This can be done by providing quality and affordable care and reform labor legislations to make the workplace friendlier for women. As illustrated in the chart, marriage results in a drop in female labor participation while it increases for men. This suggests that, among other things, the importance of reducing the burden of childcare on women's time through improved childcare services could be very critical. With this, I thank you for your time and patience. We are really greatly looking forward to the panel discussion and feel honored that our 4 distinguished panelists have made the time to join us today. Thank you again, Excellency Ibu Satu Alistair. Over back to you.
Thank you very much, Bapak Habib Rab, for presenting the IEP report today. Now, we will now begin the much anticipated panel discussion with our esteemed speakers. Therefore, I would like to invite all our speakers to the screen. Our first speaker is Bapak Febrio Kacaribu, Head of Fiscal Policy Agency of the Indonesian Ministry of Finance. And we also have Ibu Ira Noviarti, President Director of PT Unilever Indonesia. Ibu Ira started off in the company as a management trainee and has successfully advanced throughout the years to become the second woman to sit as President Director. We also have Ibu Ana Patricia Sutanto, Vice CEO of PT Pan Brothers. Ibu Ana heads one of Indonesia's largest textile company, leading more than 37,000 employees. And also joining us, Ibu Noni Purnomo, President Director of PT Bluebird Tbk. Aside from her role as President Director, Ibu Noni is also the founder of Bluebird Peduli, which activities include empowering female drivers in Bluebird and their families. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to join us today. I hope everyone is well and healthy. Good morning to you all, and I'll go straight to the question, which our first question is for Pa Febrio. Pa Febrio, once again, thank you for joining us. We would like to know, what is your assessment of the economic recovery so far, and what key challenges do you foresee for the economy this next year?
Thank you, Timothy. Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be among very distinguished individuals and achieving our discussion for today. We are talking about the current economic situation, and thank you very much for the World Bank and Habib, who presented very eloquently as to the assessment of our economic situation, and also what can be done to alleviate some of the persisting problems that we are still going to face in the midst of the pandemic challenges. Timothy, economic recovery in 2021 is showing very strong. We are looking at a much better condition, clearly, compared to 2020. We see a lot of indicators supporting this: consumer confidence, retail sales, car sales. All of them are showing a strong rebound. Especially, it's going to show in the second quarter and third and fourth quarter or later this year. Now, from the production side, we also see a lot of optimism. The manufacturers in Indonesia consistently increasing their orders of inputs. And also we see that electricity consumption by businesses and also by industries growing very strongly compared to last year. On the other hand, for example, activities of building by consuming cement, for example, is also showing very, very strongly. Mobilities, these are going to be between, what do you call it, push the brake, but also make sure that we are doing this very carefully, because as everybody is realizing, we are now facing some upsurge in terms of the number of cases, in terms of COVID-19 cases daily. So we need to be really careful and then balance between pushing forward and then kind of make sure that we are pushing the brake once in a while when we are facing a certain kind of risk. All in all, we see that with all of this risk that we are still going to be facing, and making sure that we are doing this very carefully, we still see a very strong rebound in 2021 compared to last year. Our estimate is still around 4.5 until 5.3% year-on-year growth rate for our GDP this year. Clearly, as we mentioned before, and everybody already mentioning as well, that the challenge still among us, which is the clear challenge of the pandemic. Vaccination needs to be happening very quickly. The health workers in the front line needs to be always covered, and making sure that they are doing their job very, very safely and very, very carefully, but delivering the services for everybody who are infected, and making sure that everybody is safe to recover. And we see that now we are moving on into our third stage of vaccination to reach the general society with people 18 years old or older. So we are encouraging everybody who are 18 years and older, please go to vaccination centers, and hopefully we can together, the government working hard, and all of us also working hard in making sure that we are getting out of this pandemic safely. Thank you, Timothy.
Great, thank you, Febrio. I'm going to move on to Ibu Ana. Now, Ibu Ana, the manufacturing sector has been negatively impacted by the crisis, although it has fared better than others. Now, what key challenges did your sector face, and how has it adjusted to the new normal?
Okay, thanks, Timothy. I do not think that we have the new normal yet, because the world are challenged by the other mutant of virus. However, on our sectors, because our issues is people are working from home, there's a cross-border and so on. So the demand for this sector is less. However, for Indonesia itself, everyone knows that there is geopolitics tensions between the other side of the world versus the US, right? So, or China versus US to that matters. So Indonesia is neutral country. So we are actually being deemed as a country who is quite beneficial on this sector. But however, we have domestic end that needs to be secured so that we do not get any dumping from any countries that would like to dump the products to our country. So on the export front, I think we look good. On the domestic front, we need Pak Febrio and the team to actually safeguard us. So making sure that we don't have any, we are not on the dumping ground from the imported, from the countries that has over manufactured the goods.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibuana, for your answer. I'm going to move on to another sector here, to the transportation sector. So this is for you, Ibuani. Now, COVID-19 may change consumer preferences on the passenger segment for the transportation sector. Now, on goods transports and logistics, an efficient and greener sector, this remains paramount for competitiveness and jobs. Now, in your view, what key transformations will your sector need to support growth and jobs?
Thank you, Tim. The impact of pandemic is very significant to Bluebird and especially the whole transport industry. Bluebird revenue dropped almost 70% in April 2020 compared to the average January-February 2020. And the overall revenue in 2020 dropped about 47.5%. So it's almost 3 trillion rupiah to half to 1.5 trillion rupiah. And it's also in the first time in our history that we book a net loss. So it's really a huge impact to the transportation industry, and the transportation industry itself lost about 1 million drivers. So it's about around 90% of the workforce in March 2020. So, however, the turnaround path with the vaccinations for us is also very clear, and we could see the trend of growing up at this moment. We appreciate what the government has done to us to support our industry navigating through the pandemic. So now we managed to book an increase for Bluebird specifically of a revenue increase is already about 80% compared to March 2020. So we are in a position of recovering. But in the whole transportation industry itself, the recovery rate is varied among different transportation companies. We managed to achieve this growth ahead of the industry because of our trusted brand built for the last 49 years. So the struggle is still very much felt by the whole industry itself. Of course, we thank the Transport Ministry, the Finance, and especially lately the Health Ministry for giving priorities for transport industry to receive vaccinations, because this really boosts the trust and the feeling of safety, both for our drivers and also for our passengers to use public transport. What the transportation industry need very much is to provide safe, integrated, inclusive, and sustainable transport. The blueprint of Indonesia's public transport must include a plan where people can easily become interconnected. And this is very much more important now than ever because of the change of behavior of our customers. And it is very important for the government to help to build the infrastructure for this, and also to give support for transportation industry and also for other transportation related industry to work together and collaborate together.
Thank you, Bononi. Thank you for sharing that with us. I guess there's no better way to describe the difficulties of the situation by saying that you've just booked your first net loss ever in the history of Bluebird. So thank you once again for sharing that. Moving on to Ibu Ira. Now, the COVID crisis has led to an acceleration in e-commerce and also digital tech adoption. Now, has this helped support demand for fast-moving consumer goods during the crisis? And how is the industry coping more generally and adapting production to the new normal?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. First of all, good morning to Pak Febrio, Bu Nani, and Bu Ana. I think COVID-19 are really forcing the company to change the way we do business, including Unilever. So the pandemic itself has posed several severe disruptions, I would say, from the supply disruptions, operational disruptions, and also demand disruptions. Just to give you a bit of an example, supply disruptions, for example, is such a factory closure that we have to actually face because of the infections, logistic congestions, transport restrictions. We also see the disruption in the internal operation, like the disruption in the capacity, working hours restriction, working from home policy, and the biggest disruptions that the FMCG player like Unilever is actually facing is that the demand disruptions, because the buying power is significantly weakening during the pandemic and even until now. The buying channel pattern and product format are actually all actually shifting. So the big changes I actually shared are actually coming from the demand disruptions, and this is actually leading into a very different consumer behavior, where the consumers has dramatically changed the demand pattern, because in the past, we actually operate in the past 87 years, we kind of like all know what is actually the pattern of the consumers in the 13 categories that we are actually playing. But the pandemic is actually disrupting us, which is actually not allowing us to actually see that pattern continue and changing into a very different directions. So our digital capability and acceleration e-commerce are key to tackle these disruptions. And for the big FMCG company like Unilever, these have taken a quantum leap for us on how we actually serve customers and consumers. So what we are saying, what I'm actually seeing, and my team, was that the journey that should actually be reached on digitizations and e-commerce should be reached 3 years from now is actually accelerated in only 1 year. So if I can share a couple of things that might actually give the insight in terms of what kind of transformations that we are actually doing. First is about internal process transformations. Again, as I shared before, the demand is actually becoming quite unpredictable, and the behavior of the consumers that is actually we can actually read in the past 5-10 years is actually changing into a very different direction. Just to give you the example, the hygiene product, for example, are actually going like 2 or times rate faster, while the beauty portfolio, for example, are actually going down quite dramatically. So that is actually forcing us to transform our internal process in order to actually really see how is actually we are actually coping with the changes in this consumption behavior. So during this crisis, again, as I shared, agility and the speed to respond to market demand that is changing rapidly becoming very, very critical. So internally, we streamline the way we work, fasten the decision-making process, and improve the data accuracy. And in fact, we introduced a new division called Integrated Operation. This integrated operation is actually really looking from end to end to simplify, integrate, automate, and also digitize our end-to-end operation so that we can come with a much greater speed. And with not only with speed, but also in good quality in serving our customers. And these integrated operation divisions are enabled by the technology and of course digital. So no more manual work, no more complicated alignment process and time-consuming bureaucracy. So this is actually allowing us to actually collaborate faster and act faster to the change and the demand in the market. I think the second one that I would like to share here is that how we actually respond externally to the consumer needs. Because again, the pandemic is actually shifting the consumer behavior, and the pattern is actually changing, and the new pattern is actually emerging. So the new pattern that is actually emerging that will actually stay there is basically what we call COVID kuning and EE everything. What is actually COVID kuning mean is really about the new home-centered norms, habits, practice that is likely to persist, like cooking at home, home delivery, home entertainment, hair care at home, working from home, and all of that. That is actually shaping the new needs of the consumers. And the second one is about e-everything, because we actually see that the accelerated transformation of digital life, including the rapid adoption of digital and connected service, is forcing Unilever to actually change the way we actually serve the consumers. So to respond to this big shift, we increase more presence in the e-commerce and also forcing us to digitize the way we actually serve almost 350,000 of the small retailers that we are actually serving. So we serving them now actually digitally, and that has actually helped not only us but also the small retailers itself, because it's easier for them to actually have the access to actually ask for the Unilever products, and at the same time it's also protect our people not really coming to the field at the normal frequent basis. So I think that's one thing that I can share. The last one, again, because of these accelerations, we see that the e-commerce are actually doubling, are actually much more than what we actually used to have. But equally, we also see the new emerging trend in the shopper behavior, where the growth of omni-channel has actually increased. So I think the customer is also being forced to actually do things online. So not only e-commerce players, but the customers like Indomart, Alfamart, Hypermarket are actually enabling themselves to actually get their product online. And I think this is actually really help us to actually continue to serve the consumer expectations, while actually, again, helping them to actually keep them safe at home. So I think that's what I could actually share here.
Thank you, Vira. So I guess it's part of the evolution, I guess, in the business, sharpening the instincts to see the changes and also fast adaptation to survive through the changes. Now, I'm moving on to another topic here. I'm going to go to Ibu Ana first. Now, we're talking about credit here. One issue that many try to better understand is the drop in commercial credit. Now, there seems to be a mix of supply and demand factors. Now, what is your own assessment, Bu Ana, and what do you see as a priority going forward for a bank credit?
Okay, if I have to actually open this up, I think 30 minutes would not enough. But let me summarize and frame it up. What Pak Suhasil has mentioned before is true. I think, during the crisis, each of the bank has huge liquidity in their banks. The asset grows so fast, right? However, they are very hesitant to actually lend out to the sectors, the real sectors. So this is what the government has to really picture. I do understand that the government also need liquidity, but between the corporate, the commercials, as well as the country, we should not fight on the liquidity. In fact, the government should also focus how much they should take this liquidity from the market versus the corporate and the commercials. Because the real sectors is what make the growth of the real GDP. I mean, sorry, Pak Fabio, I'm not an economist. I'm also not I'm a chemical engineer with finance background, right? So I never become a government, but what I can see in the market is, I do understand why the banks want to be safe and not risk-taking, risk-averse, in fact, but we do need to have a risk-taking because the virus cannot wait. The accelerations of the health and the economy of the people of Indonesia cannot wait either. So what the government should do actually to limitate what can be done within the liquidity in the market. Because corporate and commercials need the liquidity. It's not only my sectors, the rest of the sectors as well. You know, in other countries, they even give more liquidity to the people, not just to the commercial and the corporates. But I'm not saying this to attack the government, yeah, no. What I'm saying that I do agree with Noni that the government has give a lot of good, great, and even I said, no government in the world is better than the Indonesians. Of course, I can say that because I'm Indonesians, right? But you have given so much good policy, but the one that are really doing it is actually the stakeholders, the banks, the corporate, the commercials, not the government. The government is just a regulator, right? So I'm urging out the government to see, you know, which sectors you want to seek to prioritize, to accelerate. Yes, we need to focus on the health, the vaccination, but what's next, right? We want our people to be healthy in terms of body, but also mindset, which is economy, right? So both is hand to hand. So this is the time for us to actually look this. And in my sectors, I already urge BI, OJK as well, everyone, why don't we make a really good study on how to make a sustainable textile and garment industry? Because we can. Our sectors is so sustainable, actually, that even we do not have bank sectors, we might be able to thrive, but we need a good regulations as well to actually capture this. So this is my urging to the government as well as to the rest of the society that, look, let's not lie to each other. Let's be very realistic. Real sectors need help because we are the one who actually can help accelerate also the economy sectors, not just the health, but also economy sectors. Yeah, especially on my sectors.
Thank you, Buana. So
sorry to be very blunt, yeah, everyone, because I'm always blunt. I mean, yeah.
Thank you, Buana. Much appreciated. And I guess 2 notes for Pak Febrio to answer later on. But I'm going to move on to Ibu Noni first. Given the negative impacts of COVID on the transportation sector, what are some of the financing challenges that companies are facing, and how are they coping and overcoming those financing challenges?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Particularly for transport industry, this is like a catch-22 situation. So because of the pandemic, transportation industry falls under high-risk industry, and that is very unfortunate. And then we all know the impact of that. Moreover, there are many companies that are still in red. I mean, Bluebird is fortunate enough that starting March, we started to hit black, not in red, but a lot of other transportation companies are still in red. So this made it more difficult for them to even pay for the compounded interest. So more and more transportation company falls into default category, and they have to surrender their assets. And this makes it even more difficult to start again. So it's really like a vicious circle. Yeah. So even when the economy is recovering well, it is very difficult for transportation company to start again, because basically all of their assets will be taken by the leasing company, for example. So government incentives allocated directly to the drivers and employees is really good, but I think we need more than that, because it is no longer effective now. Because as I mentioned, we lost 1 million drivers, right? So, you know, we need to do something more. And more prudent financial support is urgently needed, such as low interest loan. This is very much needed at this moment. And extended term, not just 3 to 5 years, like infrastructure given a longer term, right? And what is also needed is a special bailout policies to help the transportation sector restructure their finance. And another one that actually for us is a bit pity in a way, because we always want to be the catalyst for green transport in Indonesia. So we launched a zero emission taxi in 2019 through eBluebird and eSilverbird. Even with only piloted 25 electric taxi, it has contributed a direct emission reduction of almost 78,000 tons of CO2 in a year. So if this can be supported also by the government, specifically in the more affordable financing, because currently the cost of the vehicle itself is at least 3 times. And there is no tangible data to benchmark the second-hand car price, which is normally part of the important variables in our calculation when we're calculating the business model. So, so our recommendation for this green transport to be supported, because it's the right time at this moment when a lot of transportation company needs to reinvest in new vehicles, then now it's a time to actually go into green transport. So the government needs to support the ecosystem itself. And as I mentioned, the green financing for corporations that are willing to invest in EV through some SOE banks, for example, because at this moment, the interest rates offered is not significantly lower than what we would take. So maybe that's my comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Noni. So that's one reason why we don't have more greener taxis for now. And that's one reason why I haven't been lucky enough to get on one of your green bluebirds. Now I'm moving on to Ibu Ira. Now, same question about credit. Now, higher investment will be critical for the recovery and medium-term growth and jobs. Now, how do you see the investment prospects in Indonesia considering the global economy and recent government reforms, including the Omnibus Law for job creation?
Right, Timothy. Indonesia is a very big market, right? It's, I think for Unilever itself, Unilever Indonesia are actually the fourth largest business within Unilever globally, after US, India, Brazil, then Indonesia. So it's actually obviously is the very important market for us. But equally, if we actually see, of course, the future of this market and what is possible and what is the potential that actually sits with this market, Indonesia will remain to be important for Unilever, but equally also for FMCG player, whether that's multinational or local. So with that, we are actually committed to continue to invest in the country, because I guess the pandemic is actually really teaching us to actually see things differently. What we did before doesn't have to actually be continued after that. So I think we're looking into digitalizations, efficiency, how we actually do things differently, doesn't actually, how we can actually even take away all of the fact that is actually make us actually move slower. So the investment is actually coming in the form of infrastructure. This is actually just to share with you in our case, communications and marketing, as well as very important is the human resource development to prepare our generations for the future of work, and also sustainability program to improve the quality of life of the people and the planet. So again, throughout the observations in the past 1 year, I believe that the government has a key role in providing and sustaining a healthy business climate. Some of the important points that I see that there is actually a very good progress in this area and is actually impacting the business positively are actually really about the bureaucracy that is actually with more integrity and dynamics. And that is actually a positive progress that we actually see there. About the improved service quality and service level agreement for the business license and permits. I think that is actually really helped to, so that we don't actually have to spend too long in getting there. And about the availability of the online single submissions as the embodiment of ease of doing business. So I think, and the last one, if I can actually share here, is the quality of the government official expertise and capabilities will also help us in really boosting the recovery in this market. So we really appreciate all of them and also the progress that the government is actually doing in this area, including effort to simplify the regulations and overlapping ministry authorities, regulatory breakthroughs such as the omnibus law. So hopefully these transitions, good transition, will continue smoothly. I would like to actually pick up specifically the investment that I believe is actually very important for Indonesia, because I think to other large market, like for example, of course, China, even to a certain extent in Vietnam, for example, I see there is an opportunity for us to actually go a bit faster in the development of our human resource, in the development and investment in the human resource. And that doesn't have to actually be in FMCG, of course, across industry. And for Unilever, what we're committed is to invest in the future of work of our employees, and the commitment to cover the reskill and upskill of the employees with the future fit skills. Because with the change that is actually happening today, it's very, very important for the people to actually relook and reset their skill again, because what have made them survive in the past will not actually make them actually win in the future, right? Or what have they make us in Unilever win in the past will not actually make us win in the future. So we have to reset the way we actually see the investment and the development in the human resource. And I believe the government is also playing a very, very, very important role to actually upskill and see the new skill that is actually required in order to actually for us to actually compete better with the rest of the big countries outside. Mm-hmm. So our investment in people is key priorities in order for the company to remain future fit with the future disruptions. And I believe, the technology and automations that is actually happening today is actually forcing us to actually do that upskill even faster than what we did before in the past.
I'm sure many would agree as well with you, Buira. Thank you for the answer, Buira. And I'm sure that we're all waiting for Fabio's point about fiscal and also about those credits. Now, fiscal policy, Fabio, has been a critical anchor for macroeconomic stability and investor confidence. Exceptional fiscal support has helped to buffer the extraordinary COVID shock. Now, how do you see the focus of the fiscal policy response shifting with the evolving crisis? Now, how to manage the balance between short-term fiscal support and medium-term fiscal sustainability?
Thank you. We need to put this in a comparison perspective. Habib earlier was very good in terms of putting our fiscal situation compared to our peers. Back in 2020, we introduced a very strong counter-cyclical budget with budget deficit 6.1% of our GDP. This haven't happened before in many years. For years before the pandemic, government budget has been in discipline below 3% maximum of the budget deficit every single year. So I need to put that into perspective first, but that during pandemic time, Indonesian government has introduced a very strong counter-cyclical spending, even though we know that our revenue is corrected very substantially. So put that into perspective, that is giving us understanding how limited the power of fiscal policy during pandemic time. But given that situation, we push forward by introducing very counter-cyclical fiscal policy. Now, back in 2020, our approach was do whatever it takes. and do it quickly. So we saw all of the sectors in the economy, and we did a broad-based approach. So we didn't see this particular sector needed more support compared to the others. And what we did was we did everything possible to make sure that first we need to safeguard the poor. So the lower income families need to be protected by boosting our social protection program. Back in last year, we provided 220 trillion rupiah for our social protection program. This never happened before. Usually it is around half of that size. So as a result, we were able, like Habib mentioned earlier, we were able to limit the impact of the pandemic on families. We saw the number of poverty rate increase not too fast, not too high. So we are able to save around 5 million individuals from the poverty during the pandemic time in 2020. Now, looking at the job situation, for example, the unemployment rate increased sharply last year, but then with data earlier this year in February 2021, the unemployment rate started to decrease again. So that's a result of fiscal policies that is very well targeting on the issue of the job market. We are looking at people going back to labor market. We are showing that the data showing that the number of jobs created within the period of August 2020 until February 2021 was actually faster than people who are looking for a job. As a result, unemployment rate is actually decreased even during the pandemic time in 2021. So with limited resources that we have in our budget, the government has to be very, very targeting in terms of the spending, making sure that the result is producing outcomes that is going to be provide the most benefit to most of the society. Now, looking at 2021, we are still looking at a very strong counter-cyclical. We are using 5.7% of GDP budget deficit for 2021. So this is still very expansive in terms of compared to our regular fiscal discipline of 3% of GDP. Now, what we do, quite similar to last year, the first priority is still the health sector, making sure that our pandemic situation is well mitigated and make sure that the vaccination happen very quickly. So this is still our first priority. And this haven't been our first priority ever before, because during the pandemic, all countries in the world will focus on health sector. Now, the second sector, the second priority clearly is how we do the stimulus, our National Economic Recovery Program, continuing from the 2020 program. But now, in 2021, we are looking at it slightly differently compared to last year. This year, we are looking at different sectors with different pace of recovery. Manufacturing sector in general is one of the faster recovering sector. But clearly, as we are looking at textile, for example, Bu En, this is slightly different. We are looking at a slightly slower recovery in the manufacturing of the textile, for example, due to some challenges from the global, as well as the changing nature of the business itself, the changing nature of everybody buying clothes now. It's very different compared to last year. And the important question is it going to stay that way for the next several years? So we need to rethink our business process as well. The same thing we can say about transportation. Transportation, and I think we can group transportation with accommodation here. This is related to mobility. This is related to how confident people are in terms of increasing their activity outdoors. This is going to change their business model. So it is very fortunate to see, very lucky we see that some businesses like Bu Noni able to navigate around these challenges of pandemic. But how about the rest of the transportation sector? How about the rest of the tourism sector in general? So we need to look at this very closely and really rethink about the business models that's going to happen for these particular sectors, and then how exactly the government can help them to boost their transformation faster in terms of creating and maintaining jobs, and also even creating better jobs for people. Now, when we look at the sector by sector, this is how we're gonna see 2021, because in general, the economy will recover better than 2020, but there are several sectors that we need to pay attention more closely, and then we need to work together. The business sector, clearly, we need to make sure that our big design of our policy, not only the fiscal policy, because as I mentioned, fiscal is very limited. We need to look at this business, this sector, this industry together, business sector and also government. We need to collaborate and see how the transformation of the economy sector by sector is going to happen during the pandemic time and during, after the pandemic time. We need to rethink about everything, and then we need to work together.
All right, thank you for sharing that perspective, Pak Febrio. Now, before I move on to the next round, you might also realize that we are almost running out of time. Therefore, I would like to kindly ask all speakers to keep their answers probably 1-2 minutes tops, because we have a lot of ground to cover here and very interesting questions here that we want to ask. That's probably the rule for us now, 1 or 2 minutes, and thank you very much for cooperating with that, because I want to touch upon the next topic, which is very important, about women in the workforce. Now, I'm going to Ibu Ira. Developing childcare, Ibu Ira, childcare services is critical to attract and retain women in the workforce, especially those with young children. Now, could you tell us what you see as the role of the private sector and public policies in addressing this issue?
Yeah, thank you. Before quickly going into the childcare, again, respecting the time of 1-2 minutes, just want to actually share what we believe that leveraging women's capabilities and increasing their participation in the economy can be one of the economic policy for boosting the recovery. And I do believe that the private sector, as a private sector, including us, we need to play more active role to promote an inclusive social society, including inviting more women in the workforce and equally supporting and helping women to stay longer in the workforce. So specific on childcare, we should support our female workers with our daycare facility that allows them to have a peace of mind while being productive at work. So I see again my observations like I think this concept of childcare has actually been adopted in the private sector. Probably the opportunity there is actually how we can actually adapt that fully across the private sector. But equally also how can actually the government also adopt this concept into their workplace. So I think that's one thing that we can actually look at. But I think equally there are actually other policy that can actually be used at the private sector, because that would actually allow the woman who's actually have the young babies or the young children, it's about about the maternity leave. I think we have 3 months maternity leave. Unilever tried to actually apply the new policy, which actually really helped a lot the woman within that very critical period, 4 months to become 4 months maternity leave. But we also kind of like extend that to actually the husband, the male, of actually providing the paternity leave, because we believe that parenting is an equal responsibility for both parents. Now, one last part that I would like to probably share or share to for the government to actually start to be looked at is that what more we can do in the public policies, right? I'm sure that there is actually a lot of possibilities that we can actually explore to actually really keeping this woman or inviting the woman is actually in the workforce. Like for example, in incentivizing the woman's advancement in the workforce itself. It's one of the things that we think about is to have a policy to incentivize the business to promote the investment of the woman in their organization, perhaps in the form of the incentive or other benefit. And we would also recommend for a policy that incentivizes more women to break the glass ceiling by advancing their studies and skills and taking the job that's probably difficult for them. And you know, these incentive can actually be at the form of many things, like the household help allowance, or increase the availability of daycares, and so forth. So I think, again, is the space that we haven't actually really looked at with the, and the creative solutions there are actually many.
All right, thank you very much, Buira. I only wish we could go further on about those solutions and implementation, but again, the time constraints. So we're going to move on to the next question for Ibu Noni. Now, the report argues, Ibu Noni, that building a more skilled workforce is essential for Indonesia's transition to middle-class jobs. What can government and the private sector do to address this challenge?
Yeah, thank you. First, we need to make sure that the recovery is sustainable in order to have jobs, right, offered. I would like to just quickly address on the women in workforce issue as well. So even though we're in a male-dominated industry, Bluebird has been actively participating in womenomics. So not only by giving equal opportunity for women to work in all levels by giving them training and all the facilities, from a taxi driver to bus driver, mechanics, to our top management. We also focus on giving the opportunity for the wives of our drivers to contribute to their family economy, because this is very essential at this moment. So through Kartini Bluebird, we provide free vocational training. So this is one of the example that a private company can go beyond just taking care of their own employees, but also the family employees. So we're giving vocational training. The idea is for them to be able to open businesses from their home. So these initiatives actually link to the continuation of their children education, which is very important for our future, and often is a less priority at this moment. So we are proud to say that 50% of our 1,500 scholarship recipients per year are females now. And Bluebird also provides opportunity for women to have a choice on how they would like to contribute to the economy. And the question of overall skill building, Bluebird not only focusing on the technical skills upgrades, such as digital literacy, specifically for our drivers, economical driving, safety driving, but more importantly now we focus on the employees and drivers' mental health, which is very fundamental and more than ever of a priority at this moment. So the future job requires people with strong grittiness and social interaction skill. And this is, in particular, is very much lacking at this moment. So we're very focused on trying to give more sharing about this. Character building should get the most priority at this moment, because repetitive and dangerous jobs will be replaced by robots, right? And complex analytics will be done by artificial intelligence. So people with the capability of using the technology to enhance our quality of life is very much needed. So we're focusing on building the mental health. We're focusing on building the character of our people more now than ever.
All right, that's two steps ahead, I guess. Not just the skills, but also the mental health and also those personal abilities. Thank you very much, Ibu Noni. Ibu Ana, more women in leadership positions. This can be a powerful engine to promote greater economic participation among women. What are the biggest challenges to women holding more leadership positions? How can these bottlenecks be removed?
I think by braving the challenge, I do believe that women in Indonesia can go beyond what they dream of. But we have to risk-taking ourselves. We have to have open communications with our spouse, with the family to support, and making sure that, you know, we can work tandemly with men. Because, okay, I'm a gender equality, what do you call it, champion, right? but I would love to see also a yin and yang between men and women. I think in Pan Brothers, opposite than Nonic, we have more women than men. But in the last 7 years, when we joined this, because Pan Brothers is the founder of IBCWE, we are also promoting men in the workforce as well, because we believe in equality means no one left behind, including the men, right? But we would like to see women to take more chances to be on the middle and upper management, and then we can do a really good teamwork tandemly. And I always believe in performance or merit, yeah. I believe in both gender equality, but I believe more in performance, because what make Indonesia can be an advanced country, what can we do to help each other is actually by perform, by committed, by doing, by having a good teamwork between us, between the men and women. And that's my view. Yeah. And if women can do this, both the family as well as we will have a work-life balance in the work, in the life balance, because we can actually tolerate the testosterone, right? Right. So I do believe in yin and yang. Yeah. I always say that I'm not feminist, but I do believe in women power and strength. Look at Pak Febri. Pak Febri is one among us, the three women. Sorry, Pak Febri. Yeah. But I try to show to the world that Indonesia can do with both the men and women power, as long as we perform and work hand to hand to actually support this acceleration of the health and economy power of Indonesia. I do believe from day one, yeah, from March 2020 until today. Because we have Pancasila. World Bank should know what Indonesia has is actually we have Pancasila. We have the Gotong Royong side of Indonesia that resonate the whole Indonesians until today. Thank you.
Okay, Bu Ana, you shouldn't forget who Pak Febri's boss is. Also,
yeah.
So.
but he's also, yeah. But she's also our boss too. We have to pay tax.
Okay, thank you, Bu Ana. So I'm going straight to Pak Febrio. Now, Pak Febrio, the government has prioritized job creation, both in the short term through expansion of cash for work programs, but also over the medium term to increase labor force participation. Now, how could fiscal policy contribute to creating more productive jobs and bringing more women into the labor force?
Yeah, we need to see this in two different parts. First is what we are and what we need to do this year and next year. And also what we need to see happening for the next 5 to 10 years. In the short run, clearly, we are still facing this pandemic. And when government tries to give incentives, to give support, clearly it is very discriminative towards informal sector and women, to be honest. If we see the numbers, for example, during the pandemic time, 2020, 2021, our support is mostly going to, for example, in terms of the credit for micro enterprises, these are almost all are women. So these are very targeted again and very discriminative towards helping families and helping micro enterprises. And these are almost 95, 98% are women. So these are giving cushion, good cushion for families. So when we help women to work and to increase their participation in entrepreneurial endeavors, they are helping their families. So when we are working with women, clearly we are helping families and we are helping our human resources to grow faster compared to if we don't focus on helping women. So this is a first premise that I would like to put forward, that the government clearly is very focused on helping the families, and helping the families usually means we help the women. Now, when we look at the kind of what do we want to see in the 5 to 10 years ahead, we have to understand that culturally, Indonesia and Asian countries are, due to the fact that we are valuing our family values, and women tend to be a very strong presence in the families in raising the kids, raising the children. and putting them in the right path for the education, for the way to go forward in terms of their future. So this cultural situation is in place. But on the other hand, we see that a lot of leaders, women leaders, are showing very strong presence in Indonesia, both in government and also in business sectors, like the panel that we have, a very distinguished panel that we have today. So there are limitless opportunities for women to actually advance their careers, and it has been shown during the many years in Indonesia. But when we are looking at the majority of these women workers, we do see some pattern that we need to rectify. For example, we know that when women considering to work, they have to think about their families. They have to think about their kids. So given that in their calculus, we have to consider to tip the balance a little bit. Although we understand the cultural aspect of it, we cannot really tilt too fast. But when we try to tilt the balance, what sort of calculus we need to work on? Clearly, when we talking about the incentive for women to work and also the incentive for firms to hire women, the families and the children are really in the equation. When we introduce the paid leave for women, that is one of the calculus that will be into the equation. And the other thing that we need to work on faster, I think, is the childcare and also the early child education, because a lot of women really want to focus their attention to their kids when they are still little, but we need to make sure that they are feeling safe, feeling okay when they work and leave their kids, younger kids, in a childcare, for example, and making sure that they are actually getting a good care. But clearly that is going to be costly. So we need to tilt that balance slightly, making sure that the women participation in the labor force is going to be just stronger and stronger, and already shown by a lot of women leaders in Indonesia that this can be done.
Okay, thank you, Fabrio. Now I'm just going to wrap this up with one simple question for everyone. Now, if you were to give one recommendation to the government to boost the recovery, of course, this question is not for you, Fabrio. You might give an answer there later on. But for the three women here, if you had to give one recommendation to the government to boost the recovery and higher skilled job growth in Indonesia, what would it be? Ibu Noni, if you may go first.
Thank you. We have to speak beyond health support from the government, I think, because the government is doing the best they can. So I think in particular, equal opportunity and good education that cater the future needs. Again, not just focusing on the technical factors, but more importantly, character building. Just that. Thank you.
That's your recommendation. Thank you very much, Ibu Noni. I'm moving on to Ibu Ana, the same question. What would your recommendation be?
Full understand and love our sector, the textile and garment industry, because this is a labor industry where men and women equally can contribute to the devisa of the country. And made in Indonesia is so well known worldwide, and despite the changing of the behavior, we can do greater goods for the benefit of Indonesia. Love us. Love our sectors, the textile and garment. We are welcoming the government to understand deep dive on our industry so we can thrive together and make Indonesia number 4 in the world within the next 10 years. Don't need to wait for 30 years. We are here to support you guys, the business sectors, right? As long as the government willing, we are willing as well, the people of Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Ana. Over to you, Wira, your recommendation.
Thank you. On higher skills job growth, we believe, and I believe, that the government would really need to prepare and step up its workforce for the future job. Because again, we see that the Industrial Revolution 4.0 and soon enough the Industry 5.0 is actually placing automation and smart technology for at its core. So Indonesia must equip its human capital to compete with the global players so that we remain competitive and we remain to be attractive place for the investment.
Thank you very much, Ibu Ira. Those are the recommendations given by Bu Noni, Bu Ana, and also Bu Ira. Now your reflections, Pak Febrio, on these recommendations and also the priorities ahead.
We need to continue our recovery, and COVID-19 is still among us. A pandemic needs to be mitigated. So we need a really strong collaboration from everybody, from the government, from the people, from the businesses. Let's work together, making sure that we are mitigating this pandemic very, very quickly. Let's support our vaccination. Everybody needs to go out and go to be vaccinated. Our economy is recovering quite strongly this year. And let's work together that making this recovery is happening faster and quicker. And we would like to see the transformation in our economy, getting out of this pandemic, getting out of this crisis, not to go back to its old shape of economy. We are now should be a more agile and more transformed in terms of how we compete with the global economy and still bringing our society, our workers together to be able to compete on a global level. And we can do this together. Thank you.
Sure, and I'm sure we could work together. And as Ibu Noni said, we appreciate it, as far as the government has been doing. We're sure that you're doing what you can, and we'll try to do what we can to support that. Now, I hope everyone here has enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. However, that's all the time we have. I would like to thank Bapak Febrio Kacaribu, Head of Fiscal Policy Agency of the Indonesian Ministry of Finance. Thank you, Ibu Ira Noviarti, President Director of PT Unilever Indonesia. Thank you, Ibu Ana Patricia Sutanto, Vice CEO of PT Pan Brothers, and also Ibu Noni Purnomo, President Director of PT Bluebird Tbk. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your knowledge and enlightening us through our discussion. We also hope all the best for the efforts to recover from this pandemic and to the success of your respective companies, and also to you too, Pak Febrio. Also, to all participants of today's event, we thank you for your attention. We hope the presentation and the rich discussion that we have witnessed here contributes to your efforts to manage through this challenging time and also to thrive through this pandemic. Now, we finally reached the end of the event of the IEP launch June 2021 today. For information, the report could be downloaded at worldbank.org/IEP. You could get the latest information regarding the World Bank programs via our Twitter account @Bank Dunia. Now, for our journalist friends, we will hold a press conference right after this. You could join by using the press conference icon on your screen. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attention and for your attendance. My name is Timothy Marbun, and on behalf of the World Bank team and everyone involved in this event, we hope to see you again in the next launch of the Indonesia Economic Prospects Report later on. Keep informed at Bank Dunia. Stay safe, everyone. Goodbye.
Terima kasih, Timothy.
Terima kasih. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Bu Ana.
Bu Ana. Terima kasih. Bu Noni, terima kasih.